Welcome to the latest edition of USC Trojans Primetime Live here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman talking about the latest in USC football. And so the Trojans continue to land the really big fish in the pond, getting an elite tight end and another pickup from Southern California, building that wall, building that fence. And like this was one of the more celebrated recruits from the 2026 recruiting cycle. Not to diminish others, but like, whoa, this one got a lot of ink. And I think Ethan Inman, as we start our conversation tonight here at the USC channel and the Voice of College Football, I think that's like the first question. That's the first, I think, point of interest, that this it's a big splash, but this felt extra splashy, and it seemed to get a little extra national resonance. What do you think accounts for that extra measure of national resonance at USC and across the country?
Well, I think the reason why I got that extra national resonance that you mentioned is, number one, first and foremost, because of Mark Bowman's talent. A lot of the things that I have been seeing about Mark Bowman over the course of, the last few weeks leading up to his commitment and then after he committed, is that he is not just the best tight end in this class, but the best tight end in several classes, according to a lot of scouts. He is very, very talented, and that's not just in blocking and some line work. It's a lot of his route running and change of direction. He's an elite route runner and an elite pass catcher, so he's a guy that you want involved in the offense. He's not a guy that you can, he's a big guy too. He's like, I think 6'4", 230, so he's got some size on him, but he's not a guy that you can just put in, the run blocking game and call it a success. He's a guy who you want involved in the passing game. You want him getting a handful of targets and a handful of catches a game. He's not regardless of how many other talented receivers and talented running backs and other talented offensive weapons that you have in 2026, he is going to make an impact immediately, and you're going to want to get him some targets. So that's, I think, a big reason why, is because of that talent. He's gotten comparisons to guys like Brock Bowers, guys like Vernon Davis. So really, really, really high on this guy are a lot of scouts for sure. So that's a big reason why. I think also just because, like you said, it's another SoCal guy. I saw when he committed, USC had a little bit of fun with Oregon because they put a clip from Anchorman on Twitter, and it was another one of their cryptic tweets that they did, but it was kind of both celebrating their commitment and kind of poking fun at Oregon for losing their commitment of a guy from Southern California. So, and yeah, it's just, I think people initially were kind of impressed with the kind of depth of USC's 2026 recruiting class, but they didn't have as much of a headline guy. They've been pursuing Ryder Lyons, and that's kind of been seen as maybe who their headliner is going to be. But then they go out and get Mark Bowman, and it's just a guy that it's like, wow, not only is USC getting all these like top guys who and building like a class of guys who are like maybe second or third tier top guys, but they got like one of the top guys, a generational guy at his position. And so, yeah, I think that put a lot of people on notice who before were like, USC, they've had some early success, but it's just, it's going to even out, and some of the bigger fish in the current college football world are going to get some of the bigger guys and later in the cycle, and then USC is going to follow the boards. But I think this shows that they're kind of here to stay in that regard.
My follow-up, Ethan, would be this. If Mark Bowman is this spectacular a prospect, and he's a tight end, like he's not being hyped up because he's a good blocker. All right. I mean, and not to say or suggest that blocking is not a really important part of what a tight end brings to the table. But like, if you're a tight end and you're getting this much pub, I mean, this means like you're going to be, Jay Novacek, you're going to be Brent Jones, you're going to be, a real downfield stud. And so my follow-up would be, is the hype just basically kind of a bigger or more expanded version of what happened with Duce Robinson? Because Duce Robinson was pretty celebrated as kind of a hybrid tight end, who could be a downfield pass catcher. What's the contrast, or perhaps what's the perspective, the context in terms of, sizing up Mark Bowman relative to Duce Robinson, who, came to USC heralded as, this really dynamic potential playmaker. And we caught flashes of it, but we didn't get like the full meal deal. So Mark Bowman, it just seems so solid in terms of the industry consensus that he is the real deal. So just offer some context and perspective in terms of those two prospects.
I think that Duce Robinson's an interesting scenario because I don't know if we really knew what to do with Duce Robinson, and I don't even know if Duce Robinson really knew himself what he was doing. I mean, don't get me wrong, Duce Robinson, incredible athlete, great football player. Like you said, showed flashes, had a couple of really long catches, a couple of really great catches. Showed flashes that he could be a number one guy. But I think he came in as a tight end, ended up switching to wide receiver. He was also playing baseball. This past summer, I covered the California Collegiate League, and he was playing collegiate summer baseball over the summer. He wasn't playing football. He was focused on playing baseball. So I just think like he still had a little bit of figuring out who he was and what he wanted to do. And, USC also didn't really know who he was and what he wanted to do. And so it just kind of fell apart. And, maybe he ended up figuring out that what he wanted to do was go to Florida State, which is unfortunate for USC. But I think with Mark Bowman, it's a little bit more clear. I mean, this is a guy who, is like we said, like not a generational, but a guy who is, one of the more impressive tight end talents in the last several years. And so I don't think he's, kind of deceived about what he's good at. He's good at playing tight end. And I don't think USC is deceived about that either. I think that there's going to be a real emphasis on, Lincoln Riley kind of expanding the tight ends role in the offense, especially, even starting this year. That's something that I made a video for this channel on Friday right after the news broke, just a quick little reaction video that a lot of the viewers who are watching right now, I'm sure, saw. And one of the things I talked about to watch in 2025 was just watch and see how Lincoln Riley incorporates more of the tight ends. Obviously, we don't have him here yet, so we don't have someone of his caliber yet. But, guys like Lake McCurry is a guy who's shown some flashes, and they've got a deep tight end room, even if they don't have a top guy like Mark Bowman. So just seeing how Lincoln Riley kind of changes the offense and gets the tight end more involved, because that's not something he's really done, I felt like, in his first few years here. USC, again, hasn't had a guy of Mark Bowman's caliber, like I said, but Lincoln Riley, and maybe this is part of why Duce Robinson eventually switched positions, they just didn't know how. He hasn't really figured out how to incorporate the tight end. It's a lot of the running backs and a lot of the receivers, and especially a lot of the receivers. It's a lot of throws to wide receivers, it feels like. But so I think there is going to be more of a commitment this time around versus what there was with Duce Robinson of we need to figure out how to get the tight end involved in the offense, because this is a guy who is very clearly a generational tight end and is very clearly, and I don't think he has any, doubts or, kind of delusions about him being something else. I think he knows what he is. So.
One other aspect that you did bring up was that, USC did a little rib poking toward Oregon. That I would have to think that that's another significant piece of the story and why it resonated as deeply as it did within the USC community, and why it resonated as widely as it did among industry recruiting analysts across the